Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us on a Sunday afternoon. Would be great if all of us can turn on our cameras before we start. We just wait for 2 more minutes for others to join in. Many people are in the waiting room. Once they join, we'll then begin. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Gaurav. May I request others as well to turn on your camera so we can have a more engaging and insightful session? All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks again for joining us on a Sunday afternoon. Welcome, a very warm welcome to our today's GDI workshop. I am Darshita. I'm a consultant working with GDI. It's my pleasure to have you all here with us today. We GDI are an impact-driven organization, and our mission is to transform the lives of individuals and communities and build an inclusive world. And we do this by forging meaningful partnerships with the government stakeholders and impact-oriented leaders so as to create a long-term sustainable impact in our communities. We started this virtual webinar series of a couple of months ago, and in the past we have hosted two events with a vision to educate the professionals more about the social impact sector. Our first event was more towards the how to transition from a fellowship to a social impact consulting sector. And in the second event we had towards the October end was more inclined towards to know more about the different kinds of the career roles which exist in the impact sector, and how can one make a long term career in the government sector or the philanthropy or the CSR, and likewise. With the feedback received from the participants from the past events, we have tried to design the today's event in the same way. So the objective of our today's event will be for us to learn more about how to leverage data to design meaningful social impact interventions. We learn about three things today: how to leverage data to formulate some impactful strategies for the social change. Secondly, we learn more about the methodologies on how to measure and assess the impact of these initiatives. And third, we'll learn more about the real world cases and live cases from our diverse panel of speakers today. Now, without further ado, I'll introduce our distinguished panel of speakers we have with us today. So we have Ajay with us, we have Pratibha and Ankit with us. Ajay is a co-founder at Think Through Consulting. He has of 20 years of experience working in this sector. He has worked with EY and KPMG before on with various multilateral government, corporate clients, and not-for-profit entities across South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Middle East on various domains such as natural resource management, sustainable livelihoods, and he holds a PG diploma in rural management from Xavier School. Pratibha is our second speaker for the day. Pratibha is currently an associate director at ID Insight. She has worked in the education research and evaluation through her roles at CSF, Reach to Reach, and the Talk Together program. She holds a bachelor's degree in economics from Singapore Management University and an MPA in international development from Harvard Kennedy School. Our third speaker is Ankit, our co-founder at GDI. Ankit, a graduate from IIT Kharagpur, he is currently the co-founder at GDI, leading programs across various domains and geographies. He leads the conceptualization, design, and implementation of the programs in partnership with the governments, philanthropies, and the other experts. Before GDI, he worked with SIF and CSF. And prior to that, he has led teams for the large-scale programs in the education sector in Chief Minister's office in Haryana. And he has also worked as a CMG in the CMGGA district and with Samagra. Now I'll set the agenda for our today's workshop. We have this workshop in three parts. First, Ankit will walk us through a presentation, sharing insights from on a live project and how can we use data in our day-to-day projects. Second, we'll have a panel discussion where we'll discuss all the interesting questions shared by you all in the Google form. And third, we'll open the floor to our audience for all the questions you might have today. Over to you, Ankit, to take it forward from here.
You're on mute.
Hi, am I audible now?
Yes, Ankit, you are.
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Yes, I think I fell prey to the by default setting of everyone being on mute in the workshop, but good to be back here now. So thank you everyone for joining in on a Sunday afternoon. I think 90 plus participants. It's a testimony to the topic that we have at hand today, that 90 plus people are joining into a workshop this afternoon, and also a testimony to the eagerness that people have, Ajay and Pratibha, to kind of learn from your experience, to see what you have to share and what you have to largely guide. My role, of course, is to first give a kind of 5-minute presentation to just take through a couple of examples of interesting use cases of data that we have encountered at GDI. But most of the discussion today will revolve around learning from Ajay and Pratibha about their experiences, about how do they see the sector evolving, what guidance, what suggestions do they have for you guys to kind of take it forward. So once again, thank you everyone for joining in. I'll keep my presentation very, very brief. And as I said, it's just to give a flavor of what kind of use cases of data we encounter on a day-to-day basis. Over time in the last 3 odd years working with GDI, some of us at GDI who have worked in the social impact sector, even beyond GDI, we have seen data being used a lot. We already have heard a lot about data being the new oil in the business ecosystem. I think it's fast reaching that stage, if not already reached that stage in the social impact sector as well. And last 3 years, while we have focused a lot on working with the governments, working with philanthropies, at the core of all of this lies technology and data. Data helps us decision make. Data helps us drive social change through that decision making. So what I want to kind of just briefly share is what we have learned over time and have now kind of started using as an internal framework, at least, is that whenever we look at data on a particular topic for a particular program in a particular sector, we think of a QAU framework, whether that data is quantifiable, whether that data is accessible, and whether that data is usable. And it's through using this QAU framework that I'll take everyone through a couple of examples that we have encountered, a couple of use cases. One of such cases was a program where the data was quantifiable. However, the data was not accessible and the data was not usable by the end beneficiary. So how did we get that enabled? And a second use case where the data was QAU compliant, or the data was quantifiable, accessible, as well as usable. In that case, how did we take it to the next level in terms of driving data to create social impact? The first one is an example of a case where we helped the Odisha government use data to drive income augmentation for the farmers. Let's go to Odisha. Let's think of a farmer named, say, Devabrata Sahu, who lives in Cuttack, who owns a 4 acre of land where he goes paddy. Seasonally, he also grows tomatoes there. And the nearest place where the farmer goes and trades or sells their commodity is the agriculture market of Cuttack. By default, they receive the MSP, the minimum support price that the government has guaranteed for paddy. But the gap in Debabrata's knowledge is that he does not have information about the market prices from markets other than agriculture market Cuttack, where he regularly goes. He also does not have a lot of information from Cuttack on the daily prices of tomatoes, which change quite often. Paddy is still a fixed price commodity. The government purchases it at a minimum support price. So the problem statement for us there was, how could we potentially increase Debabrata Sahu's revenue by providing information of price very, very regularly, so that they could also think about diversifying from paddy to any alternate crop. We started our research, so could they get to know this from a fellow farmer? The answer was no. No farmer would be 100% informed about all the markets and all the commodities. Could they get it from the nearest Gram Panchayat? No, there is no system that exists today to compile all of this information regularly in a Gram Panchayat office. Could they get it through a call center that the government has? Potentially, yes. But then it's a lot of effort. It's a lot of demand-driven method where Debabrata has to call up the call center. They need to know what is the phone number. The person at the call center needs to know all of this information to be helped out. Could they get it from the Cuttack agriculture market? Yes, but then for that, they have to really visit the agriculture market very often. Problem statement remains, could a nearby market in a place called Banki, could that be more remunerative or not? So let's see what did we do. So during our diagnosis, we realized that the government had two systems, one called ENAM, National Agricultural Market, the second AgMarkNet, Agricultural Markets Network. In these two systems, the government already collected this data on a daily basis from different markets. However, this data was used more for policy making, more for internal decision making at government, rather than to make this data available to a farmer like Debabrata. However, before this could be, in terms of diagnosis, it was a simple solution. Can we just use the data from these two systems to make it available to all the farmers? However, when we got into the details of it, there were some challenges there. So these systems were disconnected. There were overlapping markets. There were some crops and varieties which were not common. So tomato, for example, has 5 different varieties that get produced in every season. So these were some of the challenges that we had to take care of. Once the data from these two were kind of put into a common framework, we put in a layer of APIs, application program interface, through which we obtained all of that data in Odisha. Some of this data was with the Odisha government itself. Some of this data was with the central government. So we obtained all of this data in an automatic fashion through this API or through a technology. Now, once that data was obtained, the data sets were merged and made it easy for the user. So if the user is more commonly referring to a particular crop as Bengal local gram, and the technology system captures it as Bengal gram dal or chana dal, then we would need to make the language so simple so that the farmer could understand it. Finally, which are the channels through which we push the information to the farmers? SMS being one, outgoing call center being the other, and third being a dashboard through which the farmer could get to see how are the prices changing on a more regular basis. Once fixed, we worked into detailing out some of these channels. So for SMS, we had a draft SMS message, which we then engaged with the government and kind of approved by a committee within the government who said, yes, this message is good to go to the farmers on a daily basis. A dashboard where the farmer could simply select their district, select their market, select their crop, select the variety, and then they would get information of the last 1 year, which are the seasons when that crop is most market remunerative, which are the seasons when the price just goes for a slump, so that the farmer could take a call accordingly. And then finally, a simple infographic or a simple WhatsApp message that could be circulated in the farmers' groups, WhatsApp groups that exist, keeping in mind the key commodities of that particular geography or that particular district. So these were some of the ways in which, where the data was available but not quantifiable, where the data was quantifiable but the data was not usable by the end user, we made it available for the user. What it resulted into is, after a brief pilot, this project was scaled up through the entire state in Odisha, And across 125 agricultural markets, the data of 340 commodities through 5 channels started going to the farmer on a personalized basis every day. The second example is where data could be used for effective administration. This was an example from our work with the government of Andhra Pradesh, where the data was quantifiable, data was accessible, the data was usable, but actually deriving use cases for this data and using it for improving the functioning of the government and effective administration, that was something that was absent. In this case, the client or the audience that we had was the additional secretary to the chief ministers, essentially the chief minister's office in the state of Andhra Pradesh. Just for context, Andhra Pradesh has a very rich citizen database. They have data of each citizen available to the government, along with multiple layers of profiling. So what's the date of birth? What's the Aadhaar number of the citizen? They also have details on the land records that a particular citizen owns. The government also has data of the vehicles that each citizen owns. There is also a database of the electricity department saying what kind of a power supply does each citizen or their family holds. So the problem statement at task was, how do we drive decisions for the government so that the data could benefit each citizen there. Now, this is again just a lay of the land for any scheme that the government of Andhra Pradesh started getting in, along with this basic data set that was available initially. The household level data was checked and triangulated with other data sets like the land data, electricity data, transport data, and so on. And based on that, the correct beneficiary could be identified. Just to give an example, let's say the government decides to launch a new scheme. The government says, look, I'll provide 1,000 rupees per month as a benefit to all the citizens who are, let's say, who own less than 5 acres of land, who are more than 40 years of age, and who do not own a four-wheeler. Let's say that's the criteria that the government come up with. Today, in the absence of this data system, there'll be a lot of leakages and omissions in identifying the correct set of citizens. There would be errors both on the inclusion side as well as in the exclusion side. What I mean by that is there would be citizens who should not be included in the scheme, but they will end up getting included by virtue of the correct data not being there or not being triangulated. And there would be genuine citizens who might need to be benefited out of this data, out of the scheme, who might get excluded because they are not able to produce enough documentation. So this kind of a system, data system being available within the government and the triangulation helps take care of these abnormalities. Now, one interesting use case that we determined for this particular use case was Andhra government launched a scheme called Amma Vadi scheme. This was a scheme to provide benefits to households who did not have a Aadhaar seeded electricity meter. Now, the scheme was launched before we came into place. However, the problem statement was the data which was shared with us. The problem statement was that while the scheme was announced in February and the scheme was actually launched in June, when they had announced the scheme in February, they had expected the number of citizens who would avail the scheme to be this much. Once the scheme was launched, the government realized that actually this large number of citizens ended up actually availing the scheme. Now, the hypothesis that we started with to look at the data was probably between scheme announcement and scheme launch, many citizens are de-seeding their electricity meters, which is they are removing their Aadhaar number from electricity meters so that they become eligible for this particular scheme. Through this data analysis, we were able to identify exactly which citizens have availed the scheme, which out of those households already had an electricity meter seeded, but they de-seeded it just before the scheme launch. And this list could then be shared again with the government, and then another round of verification could come into place as to whether these people genuinely de-seeded their electricity meter with Aadhaar because of some other reason, or did they just do it to avail the benefit of the scheme, in which case the government could kind of take any action against them. The other example would be discrepancy in pregnant women's survey data. The ASHA workers, the ANMs, the auxiliary nurse and midwives, were asked to do a survey of each pregnant woman, based on which the pregnant woman would also receive some benefit and the ANM would also receive some benefit. What was important was to capture the unique ID of each expecting mother, each pregnant mother, and their husband also. Now, once the data was collected, we realized one particular Aadhaar number was marked against multiple pregnant women. And in some cases, the husband's Aadhaar number was also same in case the pregnant woman's Aadhaar number was different. So this data was available, this data was usable, but no one was using this data to identify these kind of issues. Once we did that, a couple of recommendations that we gave to the government was, we'll have to enable geolocation in the app through which the data is being captured. Otherwise, an Anganwadi, an ANM is just sitting at her home, entering the data for 10 pregnant mothers to be able to get the benefit that she has to. And then only entering the Aadhaar number is not sufficient. Some kind of a biometric authentication, or in the absence of a biometric authentication, at least an SMS-based authentication would be required so that this kind of fraud is eliminated from the system. So just a couple of use cases that I thought would give a initial flavor and form a basis for the discussion that we have today. However, a few learnings, just to kind of conclude the presentation on, a few learnings that we have had so far working on data in the last 3 years. One, data exists in most cases. And wherever it doesn't, before we jump onto solving a problem, we need to collect the data that is necessary. Two, user centricity is the key. Either it is using the currently available data, or it is collecting any new data. There are hundreds of things that anyone can collect. But what do we actually need that data for? What will the user benefit out of it? That's important to keep in mind. Third, iterate. The first time we use the data, we might not be able to come up with the particular perfect answer. We'll need to keep iterating the data, iterating the analysis that we do on the data to find the best answer that we have for the correct user. Think last mile. Now, in the case of Odisha, creating the dashboard was the first obvious thing that we had in mind. But through discussions with people, we realized that a farmer, only say 5% of the farmers might end up going to a dashboard. Hence, we then came up with a method to send SMS to the farmer as well as a WhatsApp message to the farmer. Fast forward, feed forward loop. So just doing a one-time analysis is not sufficient. Systems keep evolving. So how do we design a system which is here to give the results of the current times, but also is ready for the future? For example, in Andhra Pradesh, with these couple of hypotheses, proving a couple of these hypotheses, we were able to create a better system going forward in which the data fudging could be lesser. Lastly, and we have not discussed any specific example, but qualitative data is as much powerful as quantitative data. Not all data needs to be in a number format, in a numeral format. Anything, any information that we receive, any qualitative information that we received is also data which can be used for designing of better programs. Right. So I'll just kind of stop here and let everyone take 10-15 seconds to just sink in whatever was shared till now. The idea was not to go into details of what we have done, but the idea was to just start off the panel discussion with a flavor of what are the different use cases of data that can exist around us, and different organizations have been using this data, this power of this data to kind of drive the solutions that they are doing. On that note, let me just start the discussion with Ajay and Pratibha with the broad question of, it's a commonly accepted practice in the business world today that data is the new oil. People are collecting our personalized data to be able to make a business case out of it, to be able to maybe sell the data, to be able to better analyze the data so that better services could be provided to any customer. First question to Ajay and Pratibha, both of you. Do you think it's the same for the social impact or the public policy sector? In the last few years, do you think data has reached that level of importance where every decision maker, be it in the government, be it in the philanthropy space, be it in organizations that you guys are leading, data has found the paramount importance that it has in the business world? Maybe we can go with Pratibha first and then Ajay.
Sure. So on this question, I have a couple of thoughts. In terms of data as, oil in the social impact sector, I think there are two ways maybe that we can see how data comes in pretty useful. One is, of course, in amplifying the impact that organizations seek to have, and the other would be, I guess, in reducing costs. So I think that might be the difference in how businesses see data for, I guess, maximizing profits, but given the social sector is sort of optimized in a slightly different way. So there's that difference. I definitely see a lot of uptick in the language, conversations, demand for data. And so, there is obviously lots of us in the sector who are thinking of ways of collecting better data, analyzing it quickly, and being able to provide it in a more efficient way, as opposed to like reams and reams of data, which is not very insightful. What I think is like, still some way to go is in terms of actually taking the time to bring it into decisions. Like I've been part of lots of meetings where, we've got lots of decks, but it's actually maybe one table that actually drives all the decision. And that is maybe the aha moment or the click. But getting all decision makers to take out that kind of time to actually be, shift gears from the usual implementation mode that oftentimes your decision makers are on, to be like, okay, here's what the data is saying, and this is how it sort of connects to what your work is. So I think that taking that time out to actually get that aha from all the analysis is still some way to go. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Ajay, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thank you, Ankit and Pratibha for initiating on this. This is an interesting question. When you say data is the new oil, two thoughts. Number one, oil in terms of fueling something, because it's a source of energy. And number two is oil is also a source of conflict. And therefore, when we look at data as the new oil, what we are looking at is both. And I think, I totally agree. You can call it the new oil. People are doing so. And this is what, if you kind of look at the larger public policy, the macroeconomic perspective around big data, more and more, development or developed countries, which was earlier, kind of looked at from the lenses of your GDP and your economic growth, is now seen in terms of what is the control that you have. So if you see in the larger system, US has been controlling most of the data, the satellite imageries to the data science field, the big computers, the entire gamut of innovations, and it was controlling. And then the only country that kind of started challenging was China to some extent. And now you see India also getting into that particular field. So data is, when we talk about data, it's a multidimensional aspect that we are looking at. And so that was one observation that I just wanted to start with. Although, what is data? You mentioned it somewhere, Ankit, that it's information. Basically, it's a continuous set of information. It could be in numbers, it could be in observations, it could be through a series of information. And we all have been using this for a long time. I grew up in 70s and 80s, and we did not had internet, but still we were looking into data. So decision making, whether you go back during that era of social welfare, what government was doing, it was based on data. Census has been something which has traditionally been the major source of any kind of policy decisions. So whether it was a 5-year program, whether it was a 20 Sutri Karikram, jo the government of that phase used to work on. Even the entire process of decentralization that happened in early 90s was based on a series of data analysis. So it's not that data was not important earlier. It was. What has changed now is how we are using data and how we are kind of evolved to in the realm of data science. So earlier we used to have calculators in all the houses, because that was a one computing device which as a student we will have, whether we are solving very complex regression equations, or we are doing any statistical calculations. That was the only thing that we used to have at our disposal. But now, we are able to train our machine in a way that is giving a lot of analysis, which is generating tables, because we have already built that understanding into it. So I just wanted to start from there, and to conclude on this particular question, because I'm sure a lot of other questions are also going to come in, and we will be kind of getting there, is to answer your question whether data is the new oil. I think data is more than the new oil. I think even in social impact. And what is social impact? Okay, so social data is all about logic. It helps build context, whether it is number, whether it is qualitative inputs, whether it is uh, looking into the geographic terrain, whether it is into the nutrition, whether any kind of data. It helps build logic. And what is social impact? Social impact is logical interplay of various factors, right? That is how you work on the theory of change. So there is, I think in both, the key word is logic, and the logical determinants that helps you reach somewhere. In the examples that you have mentioned, you were just talking about the entire logic of change, how it is going to be possible. And what data does is it helps ease that, it makes it more efficient, as Pratibha also mentioned. So I think, yes, to the question of whether it is a new oil and whether it is applicable in social impact space or not.
And just to add on to what also Pratibha said, there are times when we have information or data overload also. So it really becomes crucial to identify which data is going to create that impact for the end users. So on this part, Pratibha, question to you. You have worked with the IMF, you have worked with IFMR, Central Square Foundation, ID Insight, and I'm sure you have interacted with several more organizations. What are some of the common themes that you have seen in terms of how different organizations perceive and utilize data for social impact, and some differences in the way organizations might look at the same set of data differently?
Yeah, sure. And all of these orgs have very different roles in the development space. And so I think, given their role, there is a difference in how data is produced and consumed and used in the settings. So I think some of the common points, definitely, of course, goes without saying, is that the use of data in like everyday work across all of these orders is just really high. I mean, it's just the way in which work gets done. So a lot of like discussions, deliberations, arguments, proving something, deciding to go left or right often happens with data. And I guess, given your vantage point, also determining, if we don't have a certain piece of data, then what's the best way to either build it or set up a system that allows for that kind of data to get generated. So I think the other piece that maybe I can comment on is, as we think of, roles of multilaterals are oftentimes building out topics, definitions, systems that can apply to multiple countries. So, there's this dimension of consensus building. How do you think of a framework that's large enough to meet different country context, and also keep a couple of levers to then contextualize to, say, different income categories that often countries get divided on? So there is that sort of slightly more macro way of approaching topics and definitions. In more academic settings, I think sort of the weightage is put on, how carefully and how well can you measure something. So there's lots of prioritization on really, really, really getting your measurement right, getting the theory right, getting, the interaction between your sort of micro-econ examples that, you're setting up in the social context, and sort of trying to understand interventions and how does that pick up. So there's a lot of like thought that goes in, and sometimes it can be at a pace which might not be that ready for the next type of org, which is more of an implementation, think and do foundations, that are really keen to demonstrate movements of, hey, this is an intervention that works. And so over there, it becomes more action research. You want to like do turnarounds in like 4 to 6 months, whereas in an academic setting, it can be easily, a couple of years of turnaround time. So I think the common points across all of these organizations is just the importance that is placed on data and how we get it and using it in decisions. But the differences arise in I guess, the principles that get weighted and given more importance, given the role that an organization is playing in the sector. So you can, you sort of give more importance to, say, rigor versus timelines, and sort of that's always like, and at ID Insight, that's kind of where we're trying to balance it, is bringing in that rigor with meeting timelines of decision makers. So I think, so I think that's kind of what I would say is the common points, as well as areas where these organizations differ in terms of how the data collection is seen, how frameworks are seen, how it gets adopted and then sort of disseminated also. So yeah, I hope that helps. Happy to take a question, follow up if there are.
Yeah, so on the follow-up part, Pratibha, the way we're planning is a few questions that we have prepared based on what the audience had given as part of the registration form. So we'll go through them first. And at this point, I would also ask all the attendees to keep writing your questions on the chat window. And towards the end, we will also ask Pratibha and Ajay to answer some of these questions from the chat window. So if you have any question on this point that Pratibha talked about, on the commonalities and the differences in how different organizations perceive and work on data, you can just keep putting your questions on the chat and we'll get back to them later. Taking up from the answer that Pratibha gave, and Ajay, from your earlier point on, it's not like data is something which is new. Data has existed for the last several years. Now, in terms of a specific type of organization, say the government, who also uses data for social impact, what would be a couple of systemic shifts that you have seen in the last, say, decade, a couple of decades, on how the government uses this data? So essentially a tactical question from a perspective that if you could share a couple of examples on how you have seen the same data being used earlier versus being used now to drive social impact by a particular type of organization, which is the government. What would you say that difference has been?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of examples actually. This is something which, in my career, I started my career right at the beginning of this particular millennia, and therefore 2.5 decades actively working with the government, and I have seen the change within the system scenario. But just for the sake of this particular and the time that we have, let me focus on 2 or 3 aspects in terms of examples. One was a very recent project that we did with UNDP, and this was with government of Telangana, because UNDP, and some of you might already know, they were working on this data in climate resilient agriculture, which is a platform that they have created, which is called DCRA, Data in Climate Resilient Agriculture. Anyone can go on Google, type DCRA, and it will take you there. What they have done is they have used publicly available data sets. So these are not data sets that needs to be purchased or anything. And they have used this to build the when you are talking about food security and you're talking about resilience within the food systems, what are the elements that needs to be there? The plan is right to go right till the Gram Panchayat level. Now, government of Telangana and earlier Andhra Pradesh, Telangana combined, they have always been very, very proactive when it comes to data sciences as well as in terms of technological advancement. So they already have, and you also in your example you mentioned about Andhra Pradesh being one of the pioneers. Telangana is also, they have done very well during the last few decades. Now, what is the significance of this is once the government actually start looking into these kind of data sets, the programming and the efficacy of the programming increases. There is one component there which is just talking about positive and negative deviances. So if you take the cases of, let's say, soil fertility, or you take the cases of soil organic carbon, or in terms of forest fires or crop fires, residual burning, and block by block, panchayat by panchayat, if you are able to analyze the trends of last 20 years, you already know where the hotspots are, what you need to do. Those are the things which government has now started taking very seriously. Now, obviously, government cannot work in isolation on these aspects. So the change that I'm also seeing among government is a larger degree of sensitization, because when you say government is a very, very complex entity. You have the bureaucracy, you have people right at the block level, at the district level, and it is very complex to maneuver. So that amount of sensitivity is something that I am seeing. I won't say there is a watershed yet, but there is something which is happening, which is moving towards there. Let me be blunt here. Many government officials, you will go and you'll talk about data, and they will talk about app. Okay, let us build an app. What they are missing out is data mining or data collection is a process. And you just can't. So you have NFHS, you have DHS, you have these school survey, ASER, etc., etc. I mean, all of this, but how you are actually bringing all of this in terms of something which is credible data set, which then can be used. So how do you create data as a public good in your department or system? So it will take time, but it is something which is a work in progress. That is one example that I wanted to share. The other example, I've recently, I went to Meghalaya. Meghalaya, land ownership in Meghalaya, government only owns 5% of land. I'm talking about hills, forest, which are owned by communities, which are owned by individuals, unlike rest of India. So they do not have actually data on land use. Now, if you're doing a natural resource management project, let's say you want to map all the spring sheds within the state so that you actually start working there, or you want to see how the mines, illegal coal, dolomite, limestone mining, something that area has been rendered unusable because of high degree of acidity there. How you are going to make it alkaline, how you are going to make it more productive. So they need to kind of map everything to GIS. Now, this is something which government has now started doing. So they are going for these kind of innovative design-based studies using machine learning, using GIS, using artificial intelligence. And I spoke to principal secretaries, I spoke to people at the joint secretary level, and they were talking to me in technical terms, which was really, really a pleasant surprise for me. So I see those kind of changes happening. We have still not reached the watershed moment. There is still a lot of work that needs to be done, but this is happening.
Great. Thanks, Ajay. This was really insightful. Which brings me to the next question. And then we can start with Pratibha answering this question. There's a lot of data. We have analyzed the data. Depending on the type of organization and the audience, we have brought out whatever was required to be brought out of this data. Now, the audience will not always get convinced that the data is telling a story that they should listen to, a story that they should make sense out of, and base their decision making on that data. Could you take us through what approach have you found to be, let's say, the most helpful in converting data into a story and then presenting it to the audience, including even convincing the audience that, look, this is the right set of data you need to be looking at, and this is the right insight that you should be bringing out from data? Maybe at a macro level, maybe through an example, whichever way you think the audience could understand it best.
Sure. I think I'll take an example maybe from the education sector, and just getting across this concept of oral reading fluency, right? Like you can oftentimes do studies and show, oh, my intervention, this is what the measurement is, these are learning outcomes. But I think oftentimes really getting the message across is showing what it means to be reading, say, 5 words in a minute versus 100 words in a minute, right? Like that just puts across a point of what does it mean to be reading really slowly at a certain grade, which is, not, suppose my grade 1 is at 65 words a minute. To be able to make a decision maker actually see that, I think that's when the message drive is driven home, as opposed to saying, oh, standard deviation and effect size and all of that and percentage changes. So I think that is a good way. I think it's pretty useful and a very powerful example of really putting a measurement definition as well as what it means to use a certain metric to understand what is the problem at hand and how are we actually shifting that. So that's one quick use case. I think one other example that comes to mind is getting decision makers to interact with data. So in one of my projects with the ministry, we were basically trying to look at how do you allocate resources towards, economic opportunities or places where people need to get skills training done. And I think a lot of allocation was happening as per close proximity to a city, as opposed to maybe the need for tackling poverty, tackling the lack of income sources. And so we basically created like an Excel tool for some of the State Department officials to just put in like, what is your monthly allocation? How do you allocate across different training centers? And then what does it mean based on our data analytics? Like, what does that look like? And I think just as people were allocating it, अच्छा, इस district में ये डालना है, उस district में, some other number, that sort of helped people realize that, okay, if I actually give it all to like the most prime city or the prime district in a state, there are lots of other districts that might not get any training allocation or any like attention. And I thought that was a pretty useful moment of sort of truth and pushing forward the message of how can you think about allocating resources towards geographies and places that might need it more than what might be your most usual, rule of thumb for allocating things. So yes, that's kind of the example.
So what I'm taking away as the most chunky point for my own understanding is the one you answered earlier on. Look, a data analyst could use any tool or any jargon. Let's say internally we have come up with the standard deviation, we have run regression models, whatever. There could be 10 different technologies that we have used to analyze the data. But in order to convey it to someone, it really needs to be broken down to a level that the other person would understand. And most of the times, maybe the other person will not even care about the types of analysis that we have done if we are able to convey the end output or the end result in a simple language. Right?
Yeah.
A similarly related question, again, a real life example, Ajay, from where you found the data to be counterintuitive to maybe even yourself or to the set of stakeholders that you had to present it to, or the set of stakeholders you were working with. Everyone had a certain hypothesis, but you use the power of data to kind of just say, look, all of this is not in line with what data actually says.
It happens most of the time, I would say. Most of the time, when you go for data mining, you know, see, we need to understand one thing. When we talk about data, uh, we talk about sample, we talk about the kind of homogeneity, heterogeneity, etc., etc. I mean, there are so many different things. Recently, we were doing a project in Sundarbans uh, for an organization that had planted a lot of mangroves in the region, and obviously their primary focus was on carbon trading because of mangroves, because obviously mangroves hold more carbon than any other forest. But they wanted to understand that, okay, because we have done this, there would have been a lot of socioeconomic impact created. And then they were carrying this notion for a long time now, like 5, 6, 7 years, that uh, things would have improved significantly. The cyclones would not have that much of impact because we have created the mangrove cover. Now, what my client did not understood or failed to kind of comprehend is Sundarbans has around 800,000 hectares of mangrove forest just on the Indian side. And what they had created was around 4,000 hectares of mangrove forest, out of which around 33-34%, which is one third of mangroves, were already degraded, which was like the strata 3. Now, when we went back to them with the data set, there was no significant socioeconomic impact. Now, they were kind of, this was surprising for them, not surprising for us when we looked at the story. But then how you, I mean, I told you, data is, when you talk about data as oil, it is fueling something, but it also leads to conflict, because you are saying that, guys, you invested, you spent some 15 years, and the net result, if you are looking into socioeconomic impact, is marginal, not what you have created, the mental castle in your head. And these are the reason. So these kind of things keeps on happening. This is something. Now, as experts from the domain, I mean, we understand, we know that we cannot just go and tell them that, okay, guys, you blurred, you guys were wrong in your thinking and all. So excuse me, I'm just having some problem in my eyes. So you need to then understand the context, and when you are going back to them, it has to be with proper fundamental logic of what went wrong and what worked in your favor, so that the storytelling brings that. I'm sure out of 80 participants here, we will talk about data. We'll give a large piece of data on an Excel sheet to now 77. 70 of them will shut their eyes. They will say, no, Baba, I don't have to do anything with this. Only 7 are those who are going to be enthusiastic data analysts and all. And therefore, what we need is stories. And this is something which we do day in and day out, because most of the time, I would say 70% of the time, data is counterintuitive, because what you imagine, what you believe, data actually gives you something else. And therefore, we need to kind of work through this storytelling approach. SROI is another example. You talk about SROI, you talk about building that entire impact chronology, and building the entire story around what $1 value is going to give you back. So I just would like to stop here and maybe answer any follow-up questions.
No, I think this was helpful, Ajay. So, just taking through the real examples of the work you guys did in the Sundarbans, and how at times we end up having a mental castle in our head on what the data is going to speak about. And
Yeah.
then someone who has really looked at the data more in depth coming in to demolish the castle.
I can, if you'll give me one more minute, I'll share one example. In 2007, India came up with a target of skilling 500 million people by 2022. I went to Tata, I spoke to many CEOs, and all of them wanted me, what is the breakup of this 500 million? I went back, I tried to do my research, I wanted to see somewhere that number would be 500 million. What I realized, and what, not just my realization, the fact of the matter was, this was done by some big consulting firm on a back of an envelope calculation that in 2007, India's population was 1.2 billion, and out of which 700 million would be in the working age, out of which 200 million would be going for work abroad, blah, 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 higher education and all, leaving aside 500 million, and that 500 billion, that becomes, because that 500 million had no breakup. And everyone was then working on this 500 million because it came from the PMO at that particular point of time. It became a vision. And NSDC was born. All the skill development agencies started working for looking at that elusive 500 million. And then in 2011, the actual data mining started when we started working on skill gap assessments at the state level, skill gap assessment within the industries. None of those reports actually could add up to 500 million. Okay. So I'm just giving you, just one more example of how data becomes elusive most of the time.
Yeah. Great. We are at 1, and what we had initially thought was that we'll have the session till 1. But I think this is interesting. The conversations, the anecdotes, etc. are interesting. So I'd, Ajay and Pratibha, first ask you permission to continue for say another 15 minutes, including audience questions, if that is fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, this is interesting, but I don't know about the audience. So we need to get a vote from the audience whether it is interesting for them or not.
Yeah. So I'll just include one of the questions that that someone from audience has asked so far, and include that in my next question to Pratibha. And there's a Pratibha question which I think will help the audience just, go back tomorrow and start implementing some of these things in their own work, hopefully. Let's say you have been asked to design a evaluation program for any topic, and let's assume education itself. The government has spent a lot of time, energy, human resources, financial resources, etc., into say Samagra Shiksha, into making sure that each child reaches the school, each child is at a certain learning outcome level, and so on. And you have been asked to design a evaluation program for checking in how much of this has actually been achieved, where still gaps exist, what are the action items that need to be taken next, and so on. So how would you go about designing this program at a higher level? 2, what are some of the tools and technologies specifically that you could use to do this? Lastly, and including the question from the audience, how would you also go about validating the credibility of publicly available data sets, like, let's say, the UDICE data that is available for education, or any other data that the government puts out as a claim to their program having run for the last so many years? Now, I know it might be a lot of questions put together. It's an entirety of what you do, but then if you could just summarize this in the next few minutes, it might help a few people in the audience start implementing this tomorrow onwards.
Right. I mean, so your first question is almost like things that we spend hours brainstorming on. How do you want to think about, if there's an education intervention or like a program in place, how do you want to think about evaluating it? And I think where we tend to start is maybe bringing in a few constraints to your question, right? Like, okay, so can we restrict it to a couple of geographies? Can we then think of the real question at hand? Because oftentimes, we can have people, there's a lot of enthusiasm, impact evaluation, we want to get an RCT done, but your operational model might not lend itself very well to a certain technique or a way to evaluate. So in that case, I think what we do a lot of times is just brainstorming what is really the question that a decision maker is trying to answer. And it might just be about implementation quality. Like, I thought books should have reached, but are they reaching? Or it could be like, I'm doing a cascade training model. Is that really working? So I think it often helps us, one, to understand, okay, what was your theory of change? So what were like your if this, then that sort of hypotheses when you started your program? Which piece of your program is like the most important that needs faster answering, so that we can prioritize that accordingly? And then just understanding if there are any existing data sets that a program is already generating, and so what might that look like? Is that usable, similar to your framework? I thought that was a pretty helpful way to quantifiable, accessible, I think usable. So the quantifiable and usable aspects would be perhaps the ones that we'd look at first, especially from a designing evaluation perspective. And then sort of looking at, okay, is the process evaluation the right thing to start off with? Is it a cost effectiveness that the policymaker or the decision maker at hand needs to look at? Is there something on the operational design that actually might require some innovation? And then we accordingly actually come back to the conversation in terms of what is really the best use case of analysis to the question at hand. So I think that's to your first question. Your second thing was on credibility of data sets. So we tend to, I mean, there's lots that has to go in terms of thinking about your data set. One, you look at, I guess, if there's space to actually calibrate that data through a small subsample verification, you do that. Or when you're even browsing through a data set, right? Like there are some basic things like missing data. If it's a merged data set, then are they all talking at the same unit? So it could be like some data sets are all child level learning outcomes, but some could be just school level infrastructure. So how well is this merged in a way for you to analyze it? Are there, any, sometimes when data sets go through some transformations, your values can change, or the sequencing can be different. And so those are aspects to sort of keep in mind, like just like basic quality checks that you can do. Distributions are another one that we look at, just to see sense in what we're seeing. Trends, I think that also helps. Sudden uptick, downtick, just looking at the logic around that, like what might have happened. Was there a measurement shift, a policy shift? So those sort of things help in terms of building your sense about a certain existing data set.
There's another one. If you could just kind of help out in a minute or so, what are some of the most crucial tools and technologies that you would use doing all of this?
I
Let's
mean,
say just some of the non-negotiable, most basic ones that everyone starting off or at a say mid-career level need to know, need to focus on.
and by that, are you meaning like programming languages or
Either programming languages
analytic?
or softwares or analytics tools.
Okay. I think R and Python, I would say, are like the most reliable analytics programming languages these days, also because they're free. In the more academic setting, there's data that's used, but that becomes slightly more academic. It's a closed source thing. So there's just in terms of technology, things that you can access. Also, oftentimes with government, we end up looking at their Google Sheets and Excel. So that's definitely something need to know. And you can get a lot done just through Excel and Google Sheets. So don't dismiss that at all and jump towards, programming as your first way to go. Yeah, I think those would be, if you're looking at really big data sets, then I think SQL is a useful database management tool. So I think those would be like quick ones to think about.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a question from Montu, which in a way links to the government spreadsheet and Excel. We'll come to it towards the end. Shifting gears a little to a particular domain within the entire social impact sector that we talk about, which is gender. Gender is an emerging theme. The amount of focus we have seen on ensuring gender equality in the last few years is at least to me unprecedented. The focus on providing equal rights to the, say, LGBTQ community. Recently, the parliament has also passed the women reservation bill. So overall, I think we are taking a fast march towards ensuring equality for all genders. Ajay, question to you: how do you think, or how much do you think data has contributed, and if yes, what data has contributed to making this stronger case, making the case for gender equality stronger?
See, data has been a tool. Let us try to look at it this way. Data is a tool. Data is a means to do things. What has happened is there is a lot of sensitization that has happened. What we are seeing now is a result of years of endless work on gender sensitization. The understanding of role reversal, the understanding what and how it needs to be done. There's also a lot of I would say, in terms of education, the focus throughout on education in terms of giving equal importance, and this generation specifically, because we as a generation, and I'm talking about we, I mean, there are a lot of younger people on this call here, but I'm talking about we as the last 70s wala generation. We as a generation, being parents of this generation, has also played a big role. Now, coming to your question in terms of data, I think data, what it has done is it has given us a lot of ammunition in terms of understanding the issues, understanding the set of challenges which exist. And therefore, the programs are being run on those. Every single data set are gender, we collect gender desegregated data. So we know exactly how a particular action is going to mean, what it is going to mean for the male or the female. Let me give you an example. We did I was working on this project for the Qatar Foundation. Okay, for the Qatar Foundation, the idea there was this was an organization called Social Development Center, and this organization would work only for Qataris. And they wanted to do a social change. They wanted to bring a social change. Now, the typical understanding that we carry is when we are talking about development, it is about income. It is about livelihoods. It is about how we can bring people up from poverty and the poverty mindset, or the issues which are related to poverty, whether it is education, lack of healthcare, something which is lacking. Now, how you bring social change in a community or in on people who are not lacking anything? There is a problem is of plenty, right? Now, when I started working on building their strategy, I started looking into the two aspects. One was age aspect, the other one gender aspect. So what is the, and therefore collecting data from desegregation of age and gender. Now, typically what we realized based on this was the issues and the challenges of Qatari male youth was significantly different from the issues and challenges faced by the Qatari female youth. Okay, both were very distinct. And therefore, the interventions of the Social Development Center cannot be made in silos at the operational level and as a strategic level. The Qatari male youth wanted to buy sports motorcycles, wanted to buy sports car, wanted to get their loans, a kind of loan mafi, after they have done all of this, the Qatari female youth were interested to go for higher education, were interested to go abroad because they had something lacking there in the system, and they wanted to go and do some research abroad. And that is what the data actually helped us to understand. Now, earlier, what these guys were doing was on the first part, which was generally accepted norm that, okay, youth are, into sports car, blah, blah, blah. We need to educate them. We need to make them more responsible. But the female youth members were already responsible. They were not getting that chance. And therefore, based on the data analysis, we were able to create that program where more female Qatari youth were able to go and work as apprentice in Europe, in Australia, in the US, and then come back and then start their own career within the Qatari industries and Qatari government offices. So that is how data has changed. Of course, your question on gender, I can go on for. I mean, this is a very large domain, but I just wanted to give this simple example to make my point clear.
Thanks, Ajay. And I think what both of you have been doing is just pulling out real life examples of conversations or analysis that you have done for different audiences, different clients. I think that to me is one way of how we have really, I think you have really been able to get the audience, get value out of this session. Last question from my side and to both of you. Several enthusiasts in the audience today who are interested in building a career in broadly something called, say, data for social impact. What would your advice, recommendation, suggestion for these amazing young professionals be on how they can shape their learning trajectory to be able to position themselves as strong candidates for any organization? There are different types of organizations which focus on evaluation, organizations which focus on, say, action research, organizations which are more into using data for driving actions for their clients, and so on. So maybe some reading material, some courses, some workshops, seminars that you might end up suggesting. But your guidance, feedback, your guidance and suggestion for the cohort of young professionals who are part of this workshop today.
I'll go first on this.
Yeah.
Reading materials, seminars, workshops. Today is the age of information, and anyone can Google and anyone can get a host of these things. So it is always a good idea to go identify what interests you and how you want to do it. But my advice to the current set of professionals who want to excel in this particular domain is to give this message. Something that my HOD gave me when I started my first day of my college. And what he told me was, development, there's a poverty of understanding, right? And there is an understanding of poverty, and you need to make a difference into both. So when you're studying poverty, there is an understanding of poverty that you are developing. But what is keeping us back and we are not able to do is the poverty of understanding, because we spend a little time on understanding. So we might know everything about machine learning, we might know a lot about ChatGPT, and we know how to operate machines. But still, when we are talking about social change, we need to understand what it means. What are the dynamics involved? So my only suggestion is spend a lot of time on observing things. Spend a lot of time, because that is also data. So spend a lot of time in understanding the logic, the context. Don't just see the world from your eyes and your perspectives. Start looking at it from different perspectives. If you are in Northeast, understand the context of Northeast. Understand how people think, how people would believe into things, and then data will start making sense to you. Because you cannot go with the perspective of someone who has been born and brought up in Delhi or Bombay and go to Northeast or go to Tamil Nadu, the coastal villages of Tamil Nadu, and analyze and start looking at it from that perspective. So that is something which one needs to do, and that requires a lot of time that goes into understanding the logic of why things happen. The question is why? Why? And that is something which you need to ask in whatever system you are working, in whatever organization you are working. But the why is not from a question of just challenging everything. It is why is we are asking yourself and not someone else. So why this is happening is the question that you are asking yourself and you are answering it. So this is my one advice to everyone who is, really looking to excel, develop hone their skills in this sector. Data, the technique of data analysis, the technique of data visualization, the technique of understanding all of this is of course important, which you can find online sources. But this you need to develop in yourself.
Pratibha, what would you say or add on to this?
Yeah, no, I mean, I quite like what Ajay has been mentioning about, I think so there are, I guess, two phases in careers, I guess. Starting out, it's helpful to be doing a bit more technical work, you know, I guess one sort of more tangible thing to do is look up Kaggle. There are lots of like use cases, examples for you to try out your own data skills. So if you just want to like, I think practice is like the only way to get good at data analysis. And then as you will progress through your career, you will understand the political economy of decision making, where data is not the only thing that people are looking at. And so a couple of books that come to mind, maybe Seeing Like a State, James Scott. Of late in India, we've got In Service of the Republic. You've got Patching Development. I think all of these, at this point in time, if people are early career folks, it helps to read books. I guess that's what will give you the information. And then as you go through work and experiences, you will get that, what Ajay is saying, the ability to calibrate. What is it? What is the context? What is really the dynamics at play and have been in play before we arrive to like come up with like idea solutions and all of that. So yes.
Great. Ajay and Pratibha, you have been, I would say, excellent in just taking real life examples, sharing also the macro picture. In terms of the audience, I think I missed mentioning in the beginning that the way we have chosen this question was based on what a lot of registration form. We had a question in the registration form essentially. What do you want out of the session? So the questions that I asked were kind of a summary of those questions we had there. So thank you so much for taking out the time on a Sunday. Before, however, we wrap up, I would request the audience, if there are any questions that the audience has, there are a couple of them on the chat window, which I can just ask Ajay, you to take up the first one, and first one around how to avoid administrative data entry problems, and Pratibha, you on qualitative data. What's the value of qualitative data in the data analysis? So just a quick short replies to these, and then if anyone else in the audience has any questions, you could just use the raise hand feature on Zoom. We can ask you, we can kind of unmute and ask the question there itself. Ajay, for the question on administrative data entry problems.
Yeah, I think this is one thing that the within the government, I've been trying to talk about these with some of the people in Department of in the Ministry of Statistics and all, is spend more time on data quality audit. Something, for example, what the question is asking is merely to understand how we can minimize errors, and there are different ways to do that. One of those could be having a strong quality assurance mechanism around it, so that the manual entry, but data flows. Data is not stationary. Data flows from a certain point and it reaches somewhere. There are aggregation errors, there are entry errors, there are assimilation errors. So it goes into an hierarchy. And I think it is important that we, the way we are implementing the component of financial audits, now we are talking about triple bottom line in environmental sustainability domain. I think data audit is something that we should take more seriously, especially when we are talking about data which has a lot of implications. Any data is, a lot of people refer to those data are going to make important decisions based on those data. So we need to have those systems inbuilt, and then use all the use AI as well as machine learning to kind of build into those kind of frameworks where these kind of errors are minimized. So, it 20, 30, 40 years from or earlier, these errors, because you were working mostly on paper-based data trails and then you were entering data into systems, this was acceptable. Nowadays, it is not acceptable. So, so that is the one way which we can use to minimize, and of course, a lot of capacity building in this domain, especially within the government setup, because people within the government setup does not come with these kind of training. So you have data entry operators sitting in each of the departments within the state. So those are the people who have been trained in DTP, which is data, how to enter data, but they are not specialists on data analysis and all. So these are the things that we need to undertake at those level. I hope that answers the question that Montu has asked.
And just to come in on other aspects of data quality, I mean, as we do a fair bit of data collection also, couple of things we tend to do. One is early on, just do lots of pilots of the data, the tool that you want to use. Have debriefs, tons of it, because that's when you realize your question is not optimally written up or there is a doubt in the enumerator who's administering the question. We also do audio audits of questions that are asked. So we do like a percentage of our surveys, we just listen again. And we also do back checks. So if someone's gone and collected data, then we do a certain percent of our surveys. We go and we sort of tally out if the answers were the same. So this is all like very field heavy operational. Other things that we can do once the data starts coming in is just doing like, we call it high frequency checks, where we're looking at, ID of people who've collected and what is the data sort of structurally looking. Is it happening in very little time, a lot of time? Am I just seeing way too much outlier for a certain person who's collecting data? So all of these things are like very easy things to do as part of your data collection efforts. And just quickly on your qualitative data, I mean, I think there's a really strong use case for qualitative data, especially when you try and get deeper insights on, general purpose questions, and just going deeper into like understanding the next level thing, like why people are doing, what led them to a certain decision. Just understanding those things are helpful from qualitative studies. And I think now with better programming languages at hand, it's getting easier to analyze a lot more text data to have insight. So I think that's kind of some of the advancements we are having in the data analysis side, given all the tech upgrades that are happening. So yeah, those are like quick comments on this.
Great. Ajay and Pratibha, once again, thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this. Kudos also to the participants who joined. And as we've said, Sunday afternoon's not probably the best time to hold these sessions, but then this was the only time slot that we could work out for this particular topic. There'll be a anonymous form that we will share on the chat. If you could just use that form to provide your feedback on the session, that will help us plan these sessions even better in times to come. And we to end the session, would just want to take a screenshot of all the attendees. It would at least give us a feeling of being in a room rather than just being online. So if I may request everyone to keep their videos on, would be good to have a screenshot with faces and not just alphabets and names. Right. So interesting to see everyone. Thank you everyone for joining in. If there are any more questions, please feel free to write to us. You have our email IDs. We are all available on LinkedIn, any other forum as well. Please feel free to reach out to Ajay and Pratibha. I'm sure they'll, it will be our honor to kind of help answer any of the questions that any young professional in the sector has.
Well, thank you, Ankit, and thank you, Darshita, for initiating this, and Pratibha for being an excellent co-panelist. Really enjoyed, and the quality of questions were also great. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ajay, Ankit, and Darshita, and all the participants who still stayed
Thank
on.
you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Have a good remaining part of the weekend. Bye.